So in Alabama, there's all kind of reasons you can get divorced. We call them grounds for divorce. Some of the more hot topic ones you might hear about often are incompatibility or irretrievable breakdown of your marriage. There's also adultery, addiction after the marriage to alcohol or certain drugs, domestic violence. If you find out the wife is pregnant at the time of the marriage by somebody else, if even a certain sentence of imprisonment can be grounds for divorce. Probably the most common reason that people list for the grounds for divorce in Alabama is simply called incompatibility. This wasn't always a grounds for divorce in our state. Several years ago, it became where basically you could say, we're not pointing fingers at anyone. We just can't function well as husband and wife any longer. And so incompatibility or an irretrievable breakdown of your marriage is the most common reason that people are able to get divorced in Alabama. As you can imagine, we also see a lot of people who get divorced because of adultery, because one of the spouse has stepped out on the other and has committed adultery during their marriage. Now, adultery is not just talking to somebody online. Adultery is not having dinner with somebody. Adultery is not even just taking a trip with somebody, although those things may be symptoms of adultery. That's not adultery. Adultery, as you can probably tell, is having sexual relationship with someone else who you're not married to. That can be difficult to prove, but you'd be surprised at how often people put everything in text, or they confirm, hey, I loved what happened last week at so-and-so place, or they will even admit it to their spouse. And then in that admission, sometimes you have been suspicious that your spouse is committing adultery, and so you might be recording your conversation with your spouse. Some people wonder, can I do that? Can we use it in court? The answer is yes. In Alabama, as long as one party to the conversation knows they're being recorded, you can absolutely record that conversation. And so if your spouse is admitting to you what they've done and pouring their heart out, they may change their mind later on and not want to tell you about it later on. But if you've got that on a recording, that could be admissible in court. So a lot of people can get divorced for adultery in Alabama. Because addiction is such an epidemic in our nation, and especially here in the Deep South, so many times people get addicted to alcohol or to drugs after their marriage. Addiction can be a grounds for divorce also. So sometimes people want to say, well, they've got drug problems. I want to get a divorce. Well, if they've always had drug problems and you married them knowing they were an addict, well, you probably can't get a divorce on that grounds because you came into the marriage knowing they had this issue. But if a problem is developed during the marriage, addiction issues can be a grounds for divorce. Sadly, many spouses, both men and women, are the victims of domestic violence in their marriage. Domestic violence or physical cruelty is the way the law defines it, can be a grounds for a divorce in Alabama. Keep in mind, if you are getting divorced for physical cruelty, I would hope that you already have taken steps through law enforcement or maybe even through getting a protection order, which is basically a restraining order for married people or people who have been in the physical relationship. I would hope you would have already had one of those things in place. If not, you need to have one because not only does it place you in danger, if you have your children present, it can place your children in danger. You'll be surprised at how often a spouse will put up with domestic violence thinking they're protecting their children's overall life because they don't want to split up the family. And I can take this. Maybe I even think I've done something to deserve it. The truth is you never, ever deserve to be physically abused in your relationship. There's no excuse for that. There's no justification for it. And so you put your children in danger, not only of maybe the abuser turns on the children, but at times if domestic violence has been going on and someone else finds about it, they could report that to DHR or to the police. And then you have a whole other issue in your marriage because now not only are you dealing with your spouse has been abusive to you, but maybe your kids get removed from your home before you can even file for a divorce because domestic violence has been going on and you did not do anything to get yourself and the children out of it. So domestic violence is a reason that people can get divorced in Alabama. If you're a husband, if you find out after your marriage that your wife was pregnant by someone else at the time of your marriage, that can be a grounds for divorce. There are some people in Alabama whose spouse commits a crime after they're married, and that spouse gets a sentence of 7 years or more, and then actually is imprisoned for at least 2 years. That also could be a grounds for divorce, even if they've never run around on you, even if they've never laid their hands on you, even if they're not addicted to drugs, just simply an imprisonment sentence for 7 years or longer, with 2 of those being served, can be a grounds for divorce in Alabama. So there are all kinds of reasons why you may be able to get legally divorced. The most common is going to be that, hey, we can't function well as husband and wife anymore, and we should be divorced simply because we have an incompatibility of temperament. It means we don't like the same things. We don't have similar interests. It means that we can't be spouses any longer. And so a lot of people just file in a non-contested divorce for incompatibility of temperament, and that's a legitimate reason why you can be divorced. There are others, but those are probably the main reasons that people get divorced in Alabama. In a divorce, there are various ways that assets can be divided. And you think of assets, there can be retirement accounts that are assets, there can be homes, there can be businesses, there can be cars, there can be jewelry, there can be hunting equipment. Anything that's valuable can be an asset. People can divide these things by agreement however you want to. But if you and your spouse have reached a point that you can't agree enough to be married to each other any longer, then you probably are going to have difficulty agreeing about how you're going to divide up your stuff. And you think it gets really down to a petty level sometimes of who's going to get this item or who's going to get that item, who's going to get the china, who's going to get our baseball cards or whatever you might be fighting over. But anything that's valuable could be an asset. In Alabama, our courts are going to take what we call an equitable look. Now, not necessarily equal, because 50-50 may not be the way things get divided up, and often it is not how things get divided up. The length of your marriage, whether things are purchased with funds you've inherited from a family member, or if you had savings and you sold a house before your marriage, you used that savings to put a down payment on a house that y'all bought together. There can be all kind of factors that weigh into why assets may not be divided 50-50. But our court really wants to take what's called an equitable look, which means we are courts of equity, which is fairness. And the court wants to be fair to you and your spouse. And just because you have been a stay-at-home spouse for your whole marriage and you haven't financially contributed does not mean that your spouse is going to get all the assets just because they were the income earner. So many people come into our office and say, I have never earned any income. I've been a stay-at-home spouse. I've raised our children. I've taken care of our home for our whole marriage. Are they really going to get everything? The answer, thankfully, is no. There are all kinds of things that can play into that, whether it's alimony, whether it's division of assets or retirement accounts. But the truth is, our courts want to give you a fair shot. And if you have a lawyer who's going to fight hard to make sure that the court knows all of the background, not only on who you are, but what you have as a family, these kind of things will really play into whether or not you're going to get what you should. There are a lot of lawyers that go in and will just put the basics up in front of the court. The details matter. Your details of your life matter, not only to us at our firm, but also to the court, because there are little fine points of your life that nobody else might know. And if your lawyer doesn't take the time to present those facts to the court, a judge who sits on your case for 4 or 6 or even 8 hours, they could never know these things unless it's broken down into pieces that they can understand and hear. And so as we look at a division of assets, not only what you have, but why you have it, how you purchased it, and how you plan to use it after the fact can all play into why assets should be divided in a certain way. I've seen spouses who were a full-time stay-at-home mom, and then they got a large share of the assets, even though the husband had been an income earner, because they did all the work. And maybe they had inherited money from the mom's family or these other things that could play into it. But the truth is, the court wants to give you a fair shot, but the only way the court can give you a fair division of your assets is if they know everything, not just what you have, but where it's come from, why you have it, and what you plan to do with it. So a division of assets can look a lot of different ways. Truly, there's no across-the-board answer to how should assets be divided in Alabama, because your marriage is not like everybody else's marriage. Your marriage is unique. Your family structure is unique. And we want to put a unique spin to the court on your situation and why you should get what you're entitled to. When you're confronted with a divorce, one of the most important questions we hear every day is what's going to happen with the custody of my children? Because you may have all kind of things. You may have a hunting club, you may have homes, you may have even a vacation place, you may have cars, you may have hobbies. You got all kind of things that matter to you. But as a parent, the absolute most important thing you're going to deal with in your divorce is what happens to my children. You may have 2 great parents in your marriage, and for many people, a 50-50 custody arrangement might be just fine. But honestly, if you could stay married to that spouse, they'd probably be okay, and you would not mind staying with them and sharing equal custody. But so many people have to split up from their spouse because something has happened. And many times that something that happened can lead to a reason that the other parent should not have an equal share of custody. This has changed drastically in the last few years, where traditionally everybody thought the judge is going to go with the mom, mom's going to get custody, dad will get every other weekend visitation. That's no longer the case in Alabama. Our courts really want parents to share equal time unless we can show them a good reason why it shouldn't happen. There are a lot of good reasons. Maybe your spouse works a crazy schedule and could never dedicate the time with the children's schooling, with the children's activities after school, with their church events, with all kind of things the kids have going on in their life that the parent doesn't go when you are married. So how could they make sure the children get there when you're not married any longer? And so a job schedule can play into why a parent shouldn't have equal time with their children. Another reason is your spouse may have problems. It's sad to say, but your spouse may have mental health issues. Your spouse may have addiction issues. Your spouse may have other things that would make them unable to exercise custody or visitation in a safe manner. So when we look at custody of children, you want to make sure that the children are the primary goal. You shouldn't look at custody about, I want to win, because the truth is nobody wins. Because a marriage has been split up, we know that's not ideal, but it happens. And so you've got to make sure as a parent that the children are in the best place possible after your divorce. And if you believe that's you, then we have to lay out all the reasons to the court why you are what the law calls the more fit and proper party to have custody of these children. We fight hard for parents because you may be in a situation where you have raised the children, you have provided everything they need, you've been there at bath time and dinner time and ball games and school activities, you've done all these things, but your spouse has beat you down emotionally where you think you can't do anything or you shouldn't do anything, and you think you're relying on that spouse for everything. Well, even if you have relied on them for everything, you can be the primary parent, and we can request the court not only to give you child support, but alimony can provide a way for you to get back on your feet and make sure your children are in as similar a situation as possible for as long as possible, so that the trauma that naturally comes to any family through a divorce can be handled in the best way possible for your children. I know you want what's best for them. You wouldn't be looking at a video to try to figure out who's going to represent me in my divorce if you could work everything out. And so if you're in a place where you need to make sure you get custody of your children, there are a lot of factors that play into that. One of the main things is going to be, are you the more fit and proper person? Are you able to make sure their needs are provided for? Are you able to make sure that emotionally and spiritually and physically and educationally they're taken care of? We got a lot of work to do to make sure that you prove to the court why you are the best person to have custody of those children. Your spouse may be fine in a lot of ways, but they may not be able to have unsupervised time with your children. They might not be able to have regular weekend visitation because of the place they're living, because of the people they live with, because of the activities they have going on in their life, or because of other problems they have. And so when you look at who's going to have custody of their children in a marriage, there's a very important question. Are you the right person? And if you think you're not, then we need to work to make sure that whatever you can get is what you should get, because you may be the person who is kind of behind the eight ball right now. You may be the person who has had problems come up in your life that you regret. And now you're trying to get back on your feet. You're trying to rehabilitate yourself and to get to where you can handle things in the right way. Even if your spouse winds up with custody of your children, you can still get the most visitation you can in a safe and appropriate way. Sometimes it has to start on a graduated schedule where you start with limited, maybe even supervised time, and then you work to unsupervised daytime visits. Then you get an overnight, and then you get to weekends, and then eventually we work into where you are able to have normal parenting time. Just because you've had problems come up in your life does not mean that you can't be an active and involved parent. The law allows you to be involved with your children to the safest extent possible. The law wants you to have equal time unless there's a good reason not to have that. But as we move forward in any divorce, our primary goal is to make sure the children are safe and taken care of in the best way possible for those kids. And you as the parent are going to be the key in making sure the court knows why you should have custody of those children. So if you have questions about a divorce, I encourage you right now, no matter what time of the day it is, whether it's the weekend, reach out to our law firm. We want to listen to you. We want to make sure that you realize that things can get better than they are right now, and we're ready to help.